The Discernment Field, Episode 5, The Nervous System and the Collapse of Discernment. When State Narrows Perception. Hello, and welcome to the Discernment Field, a podcast on mind, behavior, perception, and the search for clarity in an emotionally reactive world. In the previous episode, we explored how identity can capture intelligence. We looked at the ways belief can become fused with self-image, belonging, moral certainty, group loyalty, status, and emotional coherence. We asked why intelligent people can defend weak beliefs with extraordinary confidence, not because they cannot reason, but because their reasoning may have been recruited to protect something deeper. Now we move even further beneath the surface. When the body decides before the mind explains, because before identity defends a belief, before emotion becomes a story, before manipulation enters the frame, before intelligence builds an argument, the nervous system may already have scanned the field and made a decision. Safe, unsafe, familiar, threatening, humiliating, overwhelming, urgent, impossible. This is where discernment becomes more than a thinking skill. Because sometimes the problem is not what a person thinks. Sometimes the problem is the state from which thinking becomes possible. That line is central to this episode. We often speak about discernment as if it belongs only to the mind. Think more clearly. Analyze the evidence. Slow down. Question the narrative. Avoid bias. Evaluate the claim. Use logic. Test the source. And all of that matters. But there is a deeper question beneath it. Does the person have access to the state required to do those things? Because a frightened body does not interpret in the same way as a settled body. A shamed body does not listen in the same way as a grounded body. An exhausted body does not weigh complexity in the same way as a resourced body. A traumatized body may hear danger in ambiguity before the conscious mind has examined what is actually happening. A collapsed body may not see the possibility, not because the possibility is absent, but because the system no longer has the energy to search for it. This is why the nervous system matters. The body is not a distraction from discernment. It is one of the conditions of discernment. When the nervous system is activated, perception narrows. The mind may search for threat, certainty, escape, blame, relief, control, or belonging. When the nervous system is overwhelmed, the mind may become foggy, rigid, reactive, submissive, defensive, or desperate for simple answers. When the nervous system collapses, the mind may stop searching at all. It may say, there is no point, nothing will change, I cannot deal with this, or just go along with it. These are not always conclusions. Sometimes they are states. And if we mistake state for truth, we may misread reality entirely. This episode is not about blaming people for being dysregulated. It is not about reducing human thought to biology, or pretending that every belief is just a nervous system response. It is about recognizing that the body participates in interpretation. It is about understanding why stress changes meaning, why trauma can make the past enter the present, why collapse can look like clarity, why urgency can feel like truth, and why regulation is not merely emotional self-management, it is part of seeing clearly. The question today is simple. What happens to discernment when the body is under threat? What happens when the nervous system is already braced, scanning, defending, fleeing, freezing, pleasing, or collapsing, before the conscious mind has even formed an explanation? What happens when a headline lands in an exhausted body? When criticism lands in a shamed body? When silence lands in an abandoned body? When authority lands in a traumatized body? When uncertainty lands in a nervous system that has never been allowed to rest? This is where the previous episodes begin to connect. The crisis of interpretation is not only informational. Emotional intelligence is not only about naming feelings. Manipulation does not only operate through ideas. Identity does not only capture intelligence through belief. Beneath all of it is the state, the condition of the body, the felt sense of safety or threat, the capacity available in the system, because the mind does not think from nowhere. It thinks from a body. It stems from a history. It thinks from a nervous system that is constantly listening to the field. And this is where discernment begins to deepen. Not only what do I think, but what state is thinking through me. Not only what do I feel, but what has my body already decided this means. Not only what is the evidence, but do I have enough capacity right now to interpret the evidence clearly? That is the territory of episode 5. Part 1. Discernment is state dependent. Why clear thinking requires capacity. One of the most important ideas in this series is that discernment is not available in the same way in every state. We might like to believe that a person can always pause, think clearly, analyze carefully, and respond wisely if they simply try hard enough. But human beings do not operate like detached reasoning machines. We do not process reality from a neutral control room. We process reality through the body, and the body has its own priorities. When the nervous system senses a threat, its priority is not philosophical accuracy. It is protection. That does not make the body wrong. It makes the body ancient. The nervous system evolved to keep the organism alive, not to write a balanced essay about ambiguity. In moments of danger, speed matters. Simple categories matter. Immediate action matters. Is this safe or unsafe? Do I move towards or away? Do I fight, freeze, submit, hide, scan, brace, or collapse? The problem is that modern life constantly activates survival systems in situations that are not always physically life-threatening, but still feel emotionally, socially, psychologically, or identity-threatening. A message left unread. A public accusation. A financial worry. A family conflict, a headline, a tone of voice, a facial expression, a change in someone's warmth, a disagreement in a group, a demand from the authority, a memory triggered by the present. The body may respond as if something urgent is happening before the mind has sorted out what kind of urgency it really is. This is why clear thinking requires capacity. Capacity means there is enough inner space to hold more than one possibility, enough regulation to delay the conclusion, enough energy to examine evidence, enough safety to tolerate uncertainty, enough self-contact to notice emotion without becoming emotion, enough stability to ask, what else might be true, rather than rushing into the first explanation that relieves pressure. When capacity is low, discernment narrows. A person may still think, but the thinking becomes state-bound. Fear-shaped thinking searches for danger. Shame-shaped thinking searches for exposure. Anger-shaped thinking searches for offense. Collapse-shaped thinking searches for reasons nothing will change. Fawn-shaped thinking searches for ways to restore approval. Identity-threatened thinking searches for evidence that the self is still intact. The mind is active, but it is no longer moving freely. This is why intelligence does not always help in high activation. A highly intelligent person in a threat may create a more sophisticated threat story. A reflective person in shame may create a more articulate self-attack. A critical thinker in fear may gather more data that confirms danger. A morally sensitive person in guilt may build elaborate reasons to over-responsibilize. The mind does not stop working, it works for the state. So the first principle is this: the state is the condition of interpretation. If the state changes, the meaning may change. The same sentence may land differently after sleep than after exhaustion. The same criticism may feel useful when grounded, but humiliating when already ashamed. The same silence may feel peaceful when secure and terrifying when abandonment is active. The same uncertainty may feel spacious when regulated and unbearable when the nervous system is already overloaded. This does not mean every perception in activation is false. That would be too simplistic. Sometimes fear is warning us accurately. Sometimes anger is showing a real boundary. Sometimes the body notices danger before the mind can explain it. Sometimes a person with a trauma history detects subtle patterns that others miss. The point is not to distrust the body. The point is to translate the body carefully. The body gives a signal. Discernment asks what the signal means. That is a crucial difference. If the nervous system says, something is wrong, emotional intelligence does not say, ignore that. It says, let's listen, but let's not immediately turn the signal into a final story. What is wrong? Is it a present danger? Is it memory? Is it unfamiliar safety? Is it a social threat? Is it shame? Is it exhaustion? Is it old pattern recognition? Is it a real boundary? Is it a distorted interpretation? Is it a mixture? Capacity allows those questions to exist. Without capacity, the system wants certainty too quickly. It wants the fastest explanation that reduces tension. This is one reason stress reduces complexity. Under pressure, the mind may move towards simplified categories, safe or unsafe, good or bad, loyal or disloyal, with me or against me, truth or lie, victim or villain, right or wrong. Complexity takes energy, nuance takes regulation, ambiguity takes nervous system tolerance. When the system is overloaded, nuance may feel like danger. This is visible in arguments. Two people begin discussing a disagreement. At first, there may be some openness, but as activation rises, listening narrows. Tone becomes sharper. Facial expressions become harder. Each person hears less of what is actually being said and more of what their state expects to hear. One hears an attack. The other hears control. One feels ignored. The other feels blamed. The original issue begins to disappear beneath survival interpretation. Soon, both people may be defending against meanings that have not been fully checked. They are not responding only to words. They are responding to the state. This happens socially as well. A public event occurs. People are already exhausted, fearful, economically pressured, socially divided, overstimulated, and information fatigued. Then a headline arrives with urgency and emotional charge. The nervous system does not calmly say, let me examine this in context. It may say, here we go again, or this proves it, or we are under attack, or I need to share this now, or anyone who disagrees is dangerous. The state becomes the filter. This is why media environments and social platforms are so powerful. They not only provide information, they repeatedly place the nervous system into states: outrage, fear, envy, disgust, desire, urgency, belonging, humiliation, comparison, panic, and moral superiority. And once those states are active, interpretation changes. People may believe they are reacting to facts, but often they are reacting to facts as processed through a body already trained into activation. The nervous system does not ask, is this true, first? It asks, am I safe? And if the answer feels like no, the mind may prioritize protection over accuracy. That is why discernment must include regulation. Not as a soft add-on, but as a foundation. The clearer mind is often downstream from the safer body. Not perfectly safe. Not free from all discomfort. Not calm in a performative way. But safe enough to think. Safe enough to question the first interpretation. Safe enough to stay present with ambiguity. Safe enough to say, I do not know yet. Safe enough to delay the reaction until the field becomes clearer. This is also why shame is such a threat to discernment. Shame collapses the space needed for reflection. When a person feels exposed, defective, humiliated, or socially unsafe, they may defend, submit, attack, disappear, or over-explain. Their mind may not be evaluating truth. It may be trying to restore dignity. If someone is shamed into a discussion, they may agree just to stop the pain. If someone is publicly shamed, they may double down to avoid collapse. If someone's identity is threatened, they may become unable to hear the very feedback that could help them grow. So discernment requires environments, internal and relational, where truth can be approached without annihilation. This does not mean comfort at all costs. Growth is often uncomfortable. Accountability can be painful, reality can disturb us, but there is a difference between discomfort that stretches capacity and threat that collapses it. A regulated challenge can widen perception, a shaming attack often narrows it, a clear boundary can help reality become visible, a humiliating frame can make the self defend instead of understand. So when we ask why someone cannot think clearly, we should not always begin with intelligence. We should ask about the state. Are they overwhelmed? Are they afraid? Are they ashamed? Are they exhausted? Are they socially threatened? Are they in collapse? Are they trying to survive something emotionally before they are trying to understand something cognitively? This does not remove responsibility. People are still responsible for what they do with their states. But responsibility becomes more realistic when we understand the state itself. The practical question becomes, can I return to enough capacity before interpretation hardens? Can I pause before replying? Can I notice my body before forming the story? Can I ask whether this is a present danger or a remembered danger? Can I delay certainty? Can I check whether hunger, sleep, stress, shame, or overload is shaping the meaning? Can I regulate enough to let more than one possibility exist? Because discernment is not only the ability to think, it is the ability to access thinking when the body is under pressure. And that is why, in this episode, we begin not with logic, but with the state. Part 2, Neuroception and the pre-verbal scan. The body reads the field before thought arrives. If discernment is state-dependent, then we need to ask how state forms before we consciously understand what is happening. Because much of what shapes interpretation does not begin as a clear thought. It begins as a bodily reading. A sense, a contraction, a tightening, a warming, a bracing, a pulling back, a sudden urgency, a subtle mistrust, a feeling of ease, a feeling of exposure, a sense that something is safe, unsafe, familiar, threatening, inviting, humiliating, or uncertain before the mind has built a sentence around it. This is where neuroception becomes important. Neuroception can be understood as the nervous system's unconscious scanning for cues of safety, danger, and life threat before conscious reasoning has fully arrived. It is not the same as deliberate perception. It is not us sitting back and thinking, let me analyze this situation carefully. It is the body reading the field beneath awareness. Tone, facial expression, posture, silence, timing, rhythm, volume, pace, distance, tension, relational history, social context, memory, atmosphere, all of these can become part of the nervous system scan before the mind has formed a fully conscious interpretation. This means that by the time we say, I think something is wrong, the body may already have been responding for several moments. The breath may have changed. The stomach may have tightened. The shoulders may have lifted. The jaw may have set. The face may have become more guarded. The eyes may be scanning. The mind may already be searching for an explanation. And then thought enters, not as a neutral observer, but as the interpreter of a body that has already moved. This is why the state can feel like the truth. If the nervous system has already detected a threat, the mind may begin building a threat story. If the nervous system has detected social danger, the mind may begin building a rejection story. If the nervous system has detected shame, the mind may begin building a self-protection story. If the nervous system has detected familiarity, the mind may begin building a trust story, even when the familiar thing is not necessarily healthy. The body reads before the mind explains, and this changes how we understand discernment. Because when we ask, why did I interpret it that way, the answer may not simply be, because I thought about it. It may be, because my body read the tone as danger, because the silence resembled abandonment, because the pace of the conversation felt like pressure, because the authority figure's posture reminded my nervous system of earlier control, because the group atmosphere signaled that disagreement would cost belonging, because the person's comments did not feel safe, it felt calculated, because the warmth felt familiar, even though the pattern was inconsistent. This does not mean the body is always wrong. The body can detect subtle cues that the conscious mind may miss. It can sense tension, inconsistency, hostility, contempt, urgency, and relational change before we can explain it. It can notice when words do not match the tone. It can be noticed when a smile does not reach the eyes. It can be noticed when silence is not peaceful but loaded. It can be noticed when a question is not curiosity but an accusation. It can notice when a room has shifted before anyone names the shift. But the body can also overread. It can bring the past into the present. It can treat ambiguity as danger because ambiguity once preceded harm. It can read distance as rejection because distance once meant abandonment. It can read authority as a threat because authority once meant punishment. It can read disagreement as humiliation because being wrong once brought shame. It can read kindness as suspicious because kindness once came with conditions. So again, the goal is not to obey the body blindly or to dismiss it coldly. The goal is translation. The nervous system gives us an early signal. Discernment asks what that signal means. This becomes especially important in communication because language does not arrive as neutral content. A sentence is never received as words alone. It arrives through tone, rhythm, timing, implication, facial expression, history, and state. This is where the mirror-linguistic hypothesis and nervous system language become especially relevant to this series. Language is not only symbolic, it is somatic. It is relational. It carries the state. It enters the body before the mind completes its analysis. Take a simple sentence, we need to talk. On paper, the sentence is neutral. It means a conversation is needed. But in the nervous system, that sentence may land in many different ways. If spoken gently, with warmth and reassurance, it may land as a connection. If sent abruptly after a period of silence, it may land as a threat. If the person receiving it has a history of being punished after that phrase, the body may brace immediately. If the relationship is secure, it may create curiosity rather than fear. The sentence is the same. The field is different, or take silence. Silence can be peaceful, it can be respectful, it can be spacious, it can allow thought to breathe, but silence can also be punishing, withholding, loaded, avoidant, abandoning, condescending, manipulative. The nervous system does not interpret silence from a dictionary. It interprets silence through history, context, timing, expectation, and pattern. Silence after intimacy may feel like withdrawal. Silence after conflict may feel like punishment. Silence during reflection may feel safe. Silence from someone who usually speaks openly may feel concerning. Silence from someone who uses distance as control may feel dangerous. This is why no sentence, no pause, no tone, and no gesture can be fully understood outside the field. And this is also why people often misunderstand each other so deeply. One person says, "I was just asking a question." The other says, "It felt like an accusation." Both may be telling the truth from their layer. The question may have been intended as curiosity, but carried through a tone, timing, or relational history that the other person's nervous system read as threat. Or the question may genuinely have been accusatory, but phrased as curiosity. Discernment asks us to examine both layers, content and state. What was said? How was it carried? What was intended? What was received? What history shaped the reception? What pattern gives the sentence meaning? This is where many conflicts become confused. People argue over content while the nervous system is reacting to the field. One person says, "I did not say anything wrong." The other says, "Something in how you said it felt wrong." If the conversation remains only at the level of words, the second person may appear irrational. But if we include the nervous system layer, the field becomes more understandable. The issue may be tone, timing, implication, accumulated pattern, or the emotional charge beneath the words. This does not mean tone should be used to avoid content. Sometimes people police tone to avoid accountability. Sometimes someone raises a valid issue and the other person says, "I do not like your tone," because they do not want to address the substance. That can be manipulation. But sometimes tone really does carry, meaning that content alone cannot reveal. Discernment does not choose one layer and reject the other. It asks how the layers interact. The nervous system hears the field before the mind interprets the sentence. This can explain why a calm voice may feel safe in one context and deeply unsafe in another. Calmness is not always regulation. Sometimes calmness is presence, steadiness, and care. Other times, calmness is control, contempt, dissociation, or emotional distance. A person who has been manipulated by calm cruelty may not automatically feel safe around a calm tone. Their nervous system may hear, "This calmness is the calmness before denial, reversal, or humiliation." Another person may find calmness regulating because it signals stability. The same tone can carry different meanings depending on the pattern. This is where trauma complicates discernment. Trauma does not only store memories as images or stories. It can store relational predictions. It teaches the nervous system what to expect. If anger once meant danger, raised voices may become intolerable. If silence once meant abandonment, silence may become unbearable. If affection once came before control, affection may become suspicious. If authority once meant shame, authority may trigger compliance or rebellion before any present-day evidence is examined. The nervous system becomes predictive. It does not wait for the full event. It recognizes resemblance. This is why someone may react strongly to something that appears small to another person. The present cue may be small, but the nervous system is not only responding to the present cue. It is responding to what the cue resembles, what it predicts, what it has previously meant, and what the body learned to prepare for. The reaction may look disproportionate if we measure only the present moment. It becomes more understandable when we include the history carried in the body. But understanding is not the same as concluding. A trauma-informed reaction may be meaningful, but it still needs discernment. It may be detecting a real pattern. It may also be detecting a resemblance that is not the same as the present reality. This is why the practice is not, "My body reacted, therefore danger is present," nor is it, "My body reacted, therefore I am overreacting." The practice is, "My body reacted, so something needs careful attention." That is a very different relationship with the body. It honors the signal without making it absolute. The same applies to public communication. Media, political speech, advertising, and online discourse not only transmit information, they transmit the state. A headline can create urgency before facts are examined. A slogan can create belonging before reasoning is complete. A repeated phrase can create familiarity, and familiarity can be mistaken for truth. A dramatic tone can make a claim feel more important than the evidence supports. A moral frame can make doubt feel shameful. A visual image can activate fear before context arrives. This is why public language is so powerful. It does not merely say, "Here is something to think about." It often says, through rhythm and framing, "Here is how you should feel before you think." Breaking news, urgent warning. Experts fear. People are outraged. Shocking footage. You will not believe. Everyone must act now. Silence is violence. Only fools ignore this. This changes everything. Each phrase does more than communicate content. It prepares the nervous system. It creates a state of urgency, fear, moral pressure, curiosity, disgust, or belonging. And once the state is active, the information is interpreted through that state. This is where discernment must ask, what state is this language trying to produce in me? Not only, what is the claim? But, what is the claim doing to my body? Does it speed me up? Does it make me feel morally cornered? Does it make me afraid to pause? Does it make me feel superior? Does it make me feel guilty for asking questions? Does it offer belonging in exchange for agreement? Does it make me want to share before I understand? Does it make complexity feel like betrayal? This is the linguistic somatic layer of discernment. Language changes state. State changes perception. Perception shapes belief. Belief guides behavior. If we do not see this loop, we may mistake activation for truth. This applies internally as well. The language we use with ourselves can regulate or dysregulate the nervous system. If the inner voice says you are stupid for feeling this, shame increases. If it says you always ruin everything, collapse may deepen. If it says you have to fix this now, urgency rises. If it says they are definitely abandoning you, fear intensifies. If it says you are not safe unless you know for certain, ambiguity becomes unbearable. But if the inner language says something in me is activated, I can slow this down, the body may begin to reorient. If it says this feeling matters but it may not be the whole story, perception can widen. If it says I do not need to decide in an emergency, urgency softens. If it says I can check the facts when I have capacity, discernment begins to return. This is not just positive thinking. It is nervous system language. It is the use of words to change the conditions under which perception occurs. In relationships, this becomes practical. Imagine someone receives a message, "Can we talk later?" Their body tightens. The nervous system scans: danger, rejection, criticism, abandonment. The mind begins forming stories. They are angry. Something is wrong. I am about to be left. I need to fix this. Before replying, the person can practice translation. My body is reading threat. That may be because of the message or because of history. The message itself is ambiguous. I can ask for context rather than assume. A response from activation might be, "What did I do now?" Or, "If you're ending this, just say it." A response from discernment might be, "Yes, we can talk later. Is everything okay, or is this just something practical?" Notice the difference. The second response does not deny the body's concern. It seeks information without collapsing into the threat story. Or imagine someone in a meeting asks, "Can you explain your reasoning?" If the nervous system reads that as humiliation, the person may become defensive. They may think they are questioning my competence. But a state-aware interpretation would say, "My body is reacting as if I am being judged." The actual question may be neutral. Let me answer before deciding what it means. Again, the body is included, but not obeyed blindly. This is the heart of neuroceptive discernment, the ability to notice the body's first reading without letting that first reading become the entire reality. It is especially important because the body's first reading is fast. It is pre-verbal. It can feel more trustworthy than thought precisely because it arrives before thought. People may call it intuition, instinct, gut feeling, discernment, energy, or knowing, and sometimes it may be genuine intuition, but sometimes it may be a conditioned prediction. Sometimes it may be fear wearing the mask of intuition. Sometimes it may be familiarity wearing the mask of safety. Sometimes it may be trauma wearing the mask of certainty. So how do we tell the difference? Not perfectly. There is no flawless method, but we can look at the quality of the signal. Intuition often has a clear, quiet, spacious quality. It may say, "Pay attention." It does not always need panic to be heard. Trauma activation often feels urgent, repetitive, absolute, and body-wide. It may say, "You already know, act now." Avoid, attack, collapse, please, escape. Intuition tends to allow investigation. Activation tends to resist it. Intuition can tolerate being checked. Activation often demands immediate obedience. This distinction is not always clean, but it is useful. If the signal says, "Slow down and observe," it may be guiding discernment. If the signal says, "Decide now or you are unsafe," it may be a survival state. Again, the survival state may still contain useful information, but it needs careful translation. This is why the pause matters. Between neuroception and conclusion, there is a space we can learn to widen. At first, it may be tiny, a few seconds, a breath, a moment of orientation, a hand on the chest, a walk around the room, a delay before replying, a note to self, "My body has reacted, I need more information." Over time, that space becomes more accessible. The nervous system learns that not every signal requires immediate action. The mind learns that body truth and final truth are not identical. This is where discernment becomes embodied, not detached from the body, and not swallowed by it. Embodied discernment listens to the nervous system as an early signal system. It respects the body's intelligence, especially when the body has learned from pain. But it also recognizes that the body can predict based on old maps. So it asks the body into conversation with evidence, context, time, and reality testing. What did I feel? Where did I feel it? What cue triggered it? What does this cue resemble? What else could it mean? What evidence exists now? What would I perceive if I were more regulated? What action is proportionate? These questions turn neuroception into discernment rather than reaction. This is crucial for the whole series. Because if we are going to understand manipulation, belief, emotional intelligence, identity, public narratives, group pressure, game theory, control theory, and moral conflict, we have to understand that people are not just thinking inside these fields, they are sensing them, their bodies are reading them, their nervous systems are reacting to cues before arguments begin. A person may think they changed their mind because of evidence, when actually they changed their state because of belonging. They may think they distrust someone because of logic, when actually their body reads a familiar danger. They may think they agree because the argument was strong, when actually the tone felt authoritative. They may think they rejected an idea because it was false, when actually it threatened their social safety. This is not a reason to distrust everything. It is a reason to become more conscious of the full process. The body reads the field. Language shapes the body. State shapes interpretation. Interpretation becomes a story. Story becomes belief. Belief becomes behavior. And discernment begins when we can slow that chain enough to see where meaning was formed. That is why neuroception matters. It reminds us that before the mind explains reality, the nervous system has already begun to organize it. The task is not to silence that organization. The task is to become conscious enough to refine it, because sometimes the first signal is a warning. Sometimes it is a memory. Sometimes it is a wound. Sometimes it is wisdom. And discernment is the practice of learning, which is speaking. Part 3: Fight, Flight, Freeze, and Fawn. How survival states distort interpretation if the body reads the field before thought arrives. Then the next question is, what happens when that reading becomes a survival response? What happens when the nervous system does not merely notice a cue, but begins organizing the whole person around protection? This is where fight, flight, freeze, and fawn become important, not as labels to reduce people to, but as patterns of survival that shape perception before discernment has space to breathe. These states are not moral failures. They are not signs that someone is weak, irrational, broken, or incapable of thought. They are protective responses. They are the body's attempt to preserve safety, connection, energy, dignity, or life when something feels threatening. Sometimes they are exactly what is needed. A fight can protect a boundary. Flight can remove someone from danger. Freeze can prevent escalation. Fawn can preserve a connection when direct resistance would be unsafe. But when these responses become unconscious filters, they not only shape behavior, they shape reality. Each survival state creates its own version of the world. Fight interprets through confrontation. When a fight is active, the nervous system searches for threat, disrespect, injustice, weakness, insult, opposition, enemy, and attack. The body prepares to push back. The mind becomes fast, sharp, and often certain. It may identify patterns quickly, but it may also simplify too quickly. It may turn disagreement into hostility, ambiguity into evidence, hesitation into guilt, feedback into criticism, and difference into opposition. A fight can create the feeling of clarity because it gives the body direction. There is a target, there is energy, there is a sense of movement. Anger can feel clean compared with confusion, shame, fear, or grief. But the problem is that a fight can confuse intensity with truth. The fact that we feel charged does not mean we are seeing the whole field. The fact that we feel ready to confront does not mean confrontation is proportionate. The fact that something feels offensive does not mean offense was intended. Fight narrows interpretation around what must be challenged, defeated, corrected, or exposed. This does not mean anger is wrong. Anger can be intelligent. It can show us when a boundary has been crossed, when dignity has been violated, when something false is being normalized, and when we have been silent for too long. But anger requires discernment because it can also become addictive. It can provide relief from vulnerability. It can protect us from feeling hurt. It can turn grief into blame. It can turn fear into attack. It can turn uncertainty into premature certainty. So when fight is active, the discerning question is, am I protecting truth or protecting myself from a more vulnerable feeling? Am I responding to what happened or to what this resembles? Am I naming a real boundary or am I searching for an enemy because a threat has entered the body? What would I still see if I were not preparing to fight? Flight interprets through escape. When flight is active, the nervous system searches for exits, distance, relief, distraction, avoidance, and movement. The body wants to get away from the pressure. This can look like physically leaving, shutting down the conversation, changing the subject, overworking, scrolling, researching compulsively, planning, fixing, overthinking, or rushing into a decision simply to end the discomfort of uncertainty. Flight can distort discernment because it treats discomfort as danger. The person may leave a conversation not because the conversation is truly unsafe, but because the body cannot tolerate the activation. They may abandon a relationship, project, belief, or responsibility because complexity feels unbearable. They may confuse the relief of escape with the wisdom of leaving. And sometimes leaving is wisdom. Sometimes distance is necessary. Sometimes the body is correctly saying, this is not safe. But when flight is unconscious, it may prevent reality from being examined long enough to be understood. This is particularly visible in conflict. Someone asks a difficult but reasonable question, and the body experiences it as pressure. The person deflects, withdraws, becomes busy, changes the topic, or says, I cannot deal with this. Again, that may sometimes be true. Capacity matters. But if every difficult truth produces escape, then flight begins shaping reality. The person may tell themselves they are protecting peace, protecting energy, or refusing drama, when they may also be avoiding accountability, intimacy, uncertainty, or emotional exposure. Flight also appears in information culture. A person becomes overwhelmed by complexity and starts chasing more information, not to understand, but to outrun uncertainty. They open tabs, watch videos, compare opinions, scroll threads, collect evidence, and follow endless updates. It feels like seeking truth, but the body may be seeking relief. More information becomes movement. Movement feels safer than stillness. But discernment does not always come from more movement. Sometimes it requires stopping long enough to metabolize what is already known. So when flight is active, the discerning question is, am I leaving because this is genuinely unsafe, or because this is uncomfortable? Am I seeking information or seeking relief? Am I avoiding a necessary truth because my body wants distance? What would become visible if I stayed present for one more breath, one more question, one more moment of grounded attention? Freeze interprets through immobility. When freeze is active, the nervous system reduces action. The body may become still, numb, foggy, heavy, disconnected, or unable to respond. The mind may go blank. Words disappear. Decisions feel impossible. Time may feel slowed or unreal. The person may appear calm from the outside, but inside there may be paralysis. Freeze is often misunderstood because it does not always look dramatic. It can look like silence, compliance, indecision, passivity, procrastination, or emotional flatness. Freeze can distort discernment because when the body cannot move, the mind may begin interpreting the lack of movement as truth. I do not know what to do becomes there is nothing I can do. I cannot speak right now becomes my voice does not matter. I feel numb becomes I do not care. I cannot decide becomes there is no good option. But these may not be conclusions, they may be state messages. Freeze is often a response to overwhelm. When fight feels too dangerous and flight feels impossible, the system may reduce itself. It conserves energy. It waits. It protects through stillness. This can be necessary in genuine danger. But in everyday life, freeze can make discernment feel inaccessible. The person may later know exactly what they wanted to say, but in the moment nothing came. They may leave the interaction and only then realize that was wrong, or I should have asked more, or I did not agree, but I could not speak. This is where self-compassion matters. Freeze is not failure, it is a body response. But it still needs awareness, because people who freeze repeatedly may become vulnerable to pressure. If others learn that silence means compliance, the person's unspoken no may never be heard. If a group interprets stillness as agreement, the frozen person may be pulled into decisions they never consciously chose. If a manipulative person creates overwhelm and then asks for an answer, freeze may become a pathway into surrender. So when freeze is active, the discerning question is, have I lost access to my response because the system is overwhelmed? Do I need more time? Do I need to leave and return? Am I mistaking numbness for agreement? Am I allowing silence to be interpreted as consent? What would I know if I had enough safety to speak? Fawn interprets through appeasement. When Fawn is active, the nervous system seeks safety by managing the emotional state of others. It scans for mood, tone, approval, disappointment, irritation, withdrawal, and possible rejection. The self becomes oriented around preventing conflict, preserving connection, softening tension, pleasing, apologizing, agreeing, over-explaining, caretaking, or becoming useful. Fawn can look like kindness, empathy, diplomacy, patience, maturity, or emotional intelligence. Sometimes it genuinely overlaps with those qualities. Human beings need sensitivity to others. Relationships require care, flexibility, and mutual adjustment. But unconscious Fawn is different. It reduces self-contact. It asks, what do they need me to be so this remains safe, before asking, what is true for me? This can profoundly distort discernment. A person in Fawn may interpret someone else's disappointment as an emergency. They may confuse another person's discomfort with their own wrongdoing. They may treat a boundary as cruelty because it causes someone else pain. They may apologize before understanding what happened. They may accept blame because blame feels safer than disconnection. They may call compliance compassion and self-abandonment maturity. In Fawn, the body's priority is not truth. It is relational safety. The person may be intelligent, reflective, and emotionally aware, but their awareness is directed outward. How are they feeling? Are they angry? Are they pulling away? Did I upset them? How can I fix this? What should I say? How can I make the atmosphere safe again? Meanwhile, the inner self may become quiet, distant, and hard to hear. This is why people with strong fun responses often need time alone to know what they actually feel. In the moment, their nervous system is too busy regulating the field. Only after the other person is gone do they realize they were hurt, angry, uncertain, uncomfortable, or in disagreement. Their discernment returns when the social threat reduces. So when Fawn is active, the discerning question is, am I being kind, or am I trying to stay safe through approval? Am I taking responsibility for my part, or for someone else's entire emotional state? Am I saying yes because it is true, or because no feels dangerous? What would I know if I did not have to manage their reaction? These four survival states are often discussed separately, but in real life they can blend. A person may fight first, then collapse. They may fawn during the interaction and feel rage later. They may freeze when confronted, then flee into avoidance. They may fight online but fawn in person. They may oscillate between over-explaining and withdrawal. The nervous system is dynamic. It moves according to perceived safety, power, history, and capacity. This is why discernment must be compassionate and precise. We cannot simply say fight is bad, or fawn is weak, or freeze is failure, or flight is avoidance. Each response has intelligence within it. Fight says something matters. Flight says distance may be needed. Freeze says the system is overwhelmed. Fawn says the connection feels at risk. Each state is trying to protect something. But each state also has a perceptual cost when it becomes unconscious. The key is to recognize the reality each state creates. Fight asks, what must I confront? Flight asks, how do I get away? Freeze asks, how do I survive by becoming still? Fawn asks, how do I preserve connection? Regulation asks, what is actually happening? That last question is the one discernment needs. Regulation does not mean we never feel fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It means there is enough awareness to notice them. Enough capacity to say, fight is active, I may be searching for an enemy. Flight is active, I may be trying to escape discomfort. Freeze is active, I may need time before I can know my response. Fawn is active, I may be confusing approval with safety. This noticing itself creates space. It brings the survival response out of invisibility. Once the state is visible, it does not have to write the entire story alone. In practical terms, this may sound like, I am too activated to respond without attacking, so I need a pause. Or, I can feel myself wanting to leave this conversation, but I want to check whether it is unsafe or just uncomfortable. Or, I have gone blank, so I need time before I answer. Or, I notice I am apologizing quickly, and I need to understand what I actually think. These sentences are not excuses, they are acts of state literacy. They allow discernment to return without shaming the body for trying to protect us. And this is essential because survival states are not only individual, they can be socially induced. The media can induce a fight through outrage. Workplaces can induce fawn through hierarchy. Families can induce freeze through emotional unpredictability. Platforms can induce flight through endless distraction. Political movements can induce fear and fight. Advertising can induce desire and inadequacy. Manipulative relationships can induce alternating fawn, freeze, and fight. So the question is not only what survival state am I in, but also, what field is producing this state in me? That question protects the agency. It helps us see when a response is not simply a personal weakness, but an adaptation to an environment. It helps us ask whether the environment is safe enough for discernment, or whether the environment benefits from our lack of clarity. Because a person in a fight can be steered through enemies. A person in flight can be steered through urgency and escape. A person in freeze can be steered through overwhelm. A person in fawn can be steered through approval and guilt. Survival states make us more predictable, and predictability can be used by systems, groups, and individuals who know how to trigger them. This does not mean we should become suspicious of every activation. It means we should become curious. What state is this field producing? What story does that state make easier? What behavior does it reward? What would I perceive if I return to capacity? The collapse of discernment often begins when the survival state becomes invisible. We think we are seeing reality, but we are seeing through fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. We think we are making a choice, but we may be obeying a protective pattern. We think we are being rational, but the body may have already narrowed the field. So the practice is to bring the state into awareness before the conclusion hardens. Name the response, respect its purpose, examine its story, restore capacity where possible, then respond. Because the goal is not to eliminate survival states. The goal is to stop mistaking them for the whole of reality. Part 4: Stress, Trauma, and the Narrowing of Meaning. When the past enters the present, if fight, flight, freeze, and fawn show us how survival states shape perception, then stress and trauma show us why those states can become so easily activated in the first place. Because the nervous system does not only respond to what is happening now, it responds to what now resembles. It compares the present with previous patterns. It listens for familiar tones. It watches for familiar silences. It recognizes atmospheres, postures, expressions, rhythms, emotional shifts, relational cues, and fragments of old danger that may not be obvious to the conscious mind. This is where discernment becomes difficult, because the past does not always return as a memory. Sometimes it returns as an interpretation. It does not always say, "This reminds me of what happened before." It says, "This is happening again." It does not always arrive as a clear image from childhood, a remembered argument, or a known wound. It arrives as certainty in the body, a tightening, a shutdown, a sudden suspicion, a need to escape, a need to please, a feeling that something is dangerous, rejecting, humiliating, controlling, or impossible before the present moment has been fully examined. That is why trauma can narrow meaning so powerfully. It can make one cue stand for an entire history. A delay in response becomes abandonment. A correction becomes humiliation. A raised voice becomes dangerous. A calm authority figure takes control. A partner's fatigue becomes a loss of love. A friend's boundary becomes rejection. A moment of uncertainty becomes proof that everything is unstable. The present event may be small, but the nervous system is not measuring only the event. It measures what the event resembles. This does not mean the reaction is fake. It means the reaction may be layered. There may be something happening now, and there may also be something old being activated through it. Discernment does not ask us to dismiss either layer. It asks us to separate them carefully enough that we do not force the present to carry the full weight of the past, but also do not ignore a genuine pattern simply because we are afraid of being accused of overreacting. That balance matters, because trauma can sharpen perception in some ways. People who have lived through emotional unpredictability may become highly sensitive to shifts in tone, inconsistency, subtle contempt, withdrawal, or hidden aggression. They may notice things others miss. They may sense when the atmosphere changes before anyone says it. They may recognize manipulative patterns quickly because their nervous system has had to study them for survival. This sensitivity can be a form of intelligence, but trauma can also distort perception. The same sensitivity that notices real danger can overread ambiguity. It can treat unfamiliar safety as suspicious. It can expect betrayal before betrayal has happened. It can make calmness feel threatening because calmness was once the mask before punishment. It can make directness feel hostile because truth was once delivered through shame. It can make silence feel unbearable because silence meant emotional abandonment. So the question is not, is trauma-informed perception valid or invalid? The better question is, what part of this reaction belongs to present evidence and what part belongs to historical patterning? That is where discernment begins. Chronic stress creates a similar narrowing. When someone is under long-term pressure, financial pressure, relational instability, work stress, health fear, family conflict, social threat, information overload, or emotional exhaustion, the nervous system has less capacity to hold nuance. Complexity requires energy. Ambiguity requires tolerance. Patience requires capacity. But stress consumes capacity. It keeps the body scanning. It makes uncertainty harder to bear. It makes small events feel larger because the system is already close to the edge. This is why people often misinterpret more when they are exhausted. A short message feels colder. A neutral comment feels sharper. A mistake feels catastrophic. A delay feels personal. A disagreement feels like rejection. A practical problem feels like evidence that life is impossible. The event may not have changed, but the capacity to interpret it has. Stress not only makes people feel bad, it changes the meaning-making system. A regulated person might say this is inconvenient. A stressed person might say this always happens. A regulated person might say they are probably busy. A stressed person might say they do not care. A regulated person might say I need to think. A stressed person might say I cannot cope. A regulated person might say this is uncertain. A stressed person might say this is dangerous. This is not because the stressed person is stupid. It is because stress narrows the field of possible meanings. When the body is already mobilized, it tends to interpret through threat. When the body is already depleted, it tends to interpret through helplessness. When the body is already shamed, it tends to interpret through exposure. When the body is already lonely, it tends to interpret through abandonment. When the body is already overstimulated, it tends to interpret through urgency. The world is not received neutrally. It is received through the state that is already active. This is why the phrase I know what I saw can be both true and incomplete. We may know what we saw, but we may not yet know what state we saw it through. We may know what we felt, but we may not yet know what history gave that feeling its meaning. We may know that something landed powerfully, but not yet know whether the power came from the present, the past, or their overlap. The overlap is where most of life happens. A person may genuinely be distant, and your abandonment wound may intensify the interpretation. A manager may genuinely be unfair, and your previous experience with authority may make the situation feel even more dangerous. A friend may genuinely be careless, and your history of being dismissed may turn carelessness into proof that you do not matter. A partner may genuinely speak with irritation, and your nervous system may hear it as the beginning of emotional rejection. Both layers may be true. Discernment does not demand that we choose one layer too quickly. It asks us to hold both until the field becomes clearer. This is particularly important in emotional flashbacks. An emotional flashback does not always involve a clear memory. It may be a sudden return to an old emotional state: shame, panic, smallness, helplessness, abandonment, danger, loneliness, worthlessness, rage, or collapse. The person may be in the present physically, but emotionally the body has entered an older atmosphere. The current event becomes the doorway. The nervous system says, this is that. Once this is that becomes the body's truth, the mind begins organizing evidence around it. Someone says something slightly critical, and the body returns to the feeling of being humiliated. Someone needs space, and the body returns to the feeling of being left. Someone asks for accountability, and the body returns to the feeling of being punished. Someone offers kindness, and the body returns to the suspicion that kindness has a cost. The present moment becomes colored by emotional memory before the mind has distinguished then from now. The problem is that emotional flashbacks can create an absolute interpretation. The body does not say, part of me is remembering. It says, this is happening, and when the body speaks with that intensity, the mind may become convinced. The person may accuse, withdraw, collapse, attack, or comply, based on a past template being activated in the present field. This is why trauma-informed discernment has to begin with orientation. Where am I? What year is it? Who is actually here? What exactly has happened? What is the evidence in this present moment? What does this remind me of? What is different now? What choice do I have now that I did not have then? These questions may sound simple, but they help the nervous system separate past from present. They remind the body that resemblance is not identical to repetition. A cue can be familiar without the whole old story being true. Hypervigilance is another way trauma narrows meaning. When someone has learned that danger can appear unpredictably, the body begins scanning constantly. It looks for signs, changes in mood, shifts in tone, delayed replies, facial expressions, micropauses, word choices, posture, silence, and social atmospheres. This can be exhausting. It can also become self-confirming. If the nervous system is constantly scanning for danger, it will find something to examine. Ambiguity becomes evidence. Neutrality becomes suspicious. Rest becomes difficult because the body believes vigilance is what keeps safety possible. Hypervigilance can make discernment feel like investigation. But not all investigation is discernment. Sometimes it is fear searching for proof. The person may say, I am just being aware, and sometimes they are. But sometimes awareness has become surveillance. The mind watches, analyses, compares, checks, predicts, and prepares, not from clarity but from threat. The question becomes, is this observation expanding perception, or is it narrowing me into threat detection? That question matters because discernment should make us clearer, not more imprisoned. If our awareness makes us unable to rest, trust, receive, pause, or hold ambiguity, then awareness may have become hypervigilance. It may still contain information, but it is no longer free. On the other side, trauma can also cause underreading of danger. This may seem surprising, but it is common. If someone grew up in chaos, chaos may feel familiar. If criticism were normal, contempt may not register as serious. If emotional inconsistency were love, inconsistency may feel exciting. If control is called care, control may feel intimate. If boundaries were punished, boundary violations may feel normal. In this case, the nervous system does not overreact to danger. It normalizes it. So trauma can distort in both directions. It can make safe things feel dangerous, and dangerous things feel familiar. It can make peace feel boring and intensity feel meaningful. It can make respectful distance feel abandonment and possessive attention feel love. It can make manipulation feel chemistry and regulation feel emptiness. This is why reality testing is essential. The body's familiarity is not always the same as safety. A useful question is, does this feel safe or does it feel familiar? Another is, does this feel threatening because it is harmful or because it is unfamiliar? These are not easy questions, but they open the field. The nervous system may prefer the familiar because familiar patterns are predictable, even when painful. A person may return to the same kind of relationship, group, workplace, conflict, or emotional dynamic because the body knows how to survive there. Safety can feel strange if the nervous system has not been trained to recognize it. A healthy connection may feel too quiet. A clear boundary may feel harsh. A stable person may feel less excited. A calm conversation may feel suspicious because the body expects the twist. This is where healing and discernment meet. The goal is not simply to think better. It is to help the nervous system learn new meanings. Not all distance is abandonment. Not all criticism is humiliation. Not all authority is dangerous. Not all calm is control. Not all intended intimacy. Not all guilt means wrongdoing. Not all fear means threat. Not all familiarity means safety. This learning does not happen by force. You cannot simply command the nervous system to update. It updates through repeated experience, careful reflection, safe enough relationships, grounded language, bodily regulation, and reality testing over time. Discernment becomes a bridge between the old map and the present terrain. Language plays a major role here. The way we speak to ourselves during activation can either fuse past and present or help separate them. If the inner language says, this is happening again, the nervous system may intensify. If it says, something in this resembles the past, but I need to check the present, space opens. If it says, I am unsafe, the body may collapse into threat. If it says, I feel unsafe and I need to understand why, discernment remains possible. If it says, I always get abandoned, the story hardens. If it says, this has touched abandonment fear. What is actually happening? The field widens. This is nervous system language in practice. Language becomes a regulatory bridge. It does not deny emotion. It gives emotion a more precise pathway. It allows the body to be heard without letting the past become the only interpreter. Relationally, this can change everything. Instead of saying, you are abandoning me, someone might say, when you became quiet, my body went into abandonment fear. I need to check what is actually happening. Instead of saying, you are attacking me, they might say, I am hearing this as criticism, and I want to understand whether that is your intention. Instead of saying, I cannot trust you, they might say, something in me is struggling to trust right now. I need to separate your behavior from my history. These sentences are not always possible in high activation, but they show the direction. They create a language where trauma can be included without making it the ruler of reality. Of course, discernment also requires boundaries. Sometimes the present really is repeating the past. Sometimes a person really is abandoning, humiliating, manipulating, controlling, or dismissing. Trauma-informed discernment should never become an excuse to doubt ourselves endlessly. The question is not, is this all just my trauma? That can become self-gaslighting. The better question is, what part of this belongs to my history? And what part belongs to this pattern in front of me? If a behavior repeats over time, if accountability is avoided, if repair never comes, if your body becomes more hypervigilant around someone, if your clarity decreases after every conversation, if boundaries are punished, if emotional safety only exists when you comply, then the present pattern deserves attention. The fact that you have trauma does not mean your perception is invalid. It means your perception deserves careful translation, not dismissal. This is why stress and trauma require both compassion and precision. Compassion says, my body is trying to protect me. It has reasons for reacting this way. It learned from somewhere. Precision says, this reaction still needs to be examined. I need to know whether I am responding to the present, the past, or both. Together, they create discernment. Without compassion, we shame the body for surviving. Without precision, we may let survival templates define reality. Compassion alone may become indulgence. Precision alone may become cold self-distrust. But together, they allow the nervous system to be included in clarity. This is especially important in a culture of constant stress. Many people are not interpreting life from a settled baseline. They are interpreting through exhaustion, financial strain, social comparison, information overload, loneliness, grief, unresolved trauma, sleep disruption, political fear, digital overstimulation, and chronic uncertainty. Then we wonder why public conversation becomes reactive, why relationships become fragile, why beliefs become rigid, why people seek simple answers, why outrage spreads, and why collapse becomes common. A stressed culture produces narrowed meanings. Under chronic stress, people may lose tolerance for ambiguity. They may crave certainty, group belonging, enemies, slogans, strong leaders, simple narratives, emotional discharge, or numb distraction. This is not because they are unintelligent. It is because their systems are overloaded. And overloaded systems become easier to steer. This connects back to everything we have explored in the series so far. Manipulation works better when people are stressed. Identity capture deepens when people need belonging. Emotional projection intensifies when nervous systems are overloaded. Public narratives spread faster when they activate fear or moral urgency. Discernment collapses when the body lacks capacity. So the work is not only personal, it is cultural, it is relational, it is linguistic, it is embodied. We need to ask what kinds of environments produce enough capacity for discernment, and what kinds of environments benefit from keeping people activated. What happens when people are constantly rushed, shamed, frightened, compared, overstimulated, and exhausted? What happens when public language repeatedly cues threat, urgency, scarcity, resentment, and moral panic? What happens when rest becomes rare and reflection becomes a luxury? What happens when people are asked to make sense of reality while their bodies are already in survival mode? The answer is that meaning narrows. When meaning narrows, control becomes easier. That is why this episode matters. It is not enough to tell people to think more clearly. We must understand what prevents clear thinking from becoming available. Stress and trauma do not remove intelligence, but they can narrow access to it. They can make the past feel present, make ambiguity feel dangerous, make familiarity feel safe, make collapse feel like truth, and make certainty feel more comforting than accuracy. Discernment begins when we can notice that narrowing. When can we say something old may be entering this moment? When we can say, my body is responding strongly, and that deserves care. When we can say, this may be a real signal, but I need to understand its source. When we can say, I will not dismiss my nervous system, and I will not let it translate reality alone. That is the work. Not to escape the past by denying it. Not to let the past govern the present unconsciously, but to bring enough awareness into the body that the present has a chance to be seen as itself. Part 5: Collapse States and the Loss of Discernment. When the system stops searching for possibility, if stress and trauma narrow, meaning by making the past enter the present, collapse narrows meaning in another way. Collapse does not always feel like fear. It does not always feel like panic, anger, or obvious activation. Sometimes, collapse feels like nothing. It feels like heaviness, fog, numbness, defeat, apathy, emotional flatness, a quiet sense that there is no point, no way through, no energy left, no reason to try, no possibility worth reaching for. And because collapse can feel so quiet, people often mistake it for truth. This is one of the most important distinctions in nervous system discernment. Collapse is not clarity. Collapse is a state where possibility has disappeared from perception. When the system collapses, the mind may not say, I am overwhelmed. It may say, nothing will change. It may not say, I am exhausted. It may say, there is no point. It may not say, my body has reached capacity. It may say, I do not care anymore. It may not say, I need support. It may say, I am done with everything. These thoughts can feel final because the state underneath them is so depleted, but they are not always conclusions. Sometimes they are the language of a nervous system that no longer has enough energy to keep searching. This is why collapse is so dangerous for discernment. In fight, the person may see too many enemies. In flight, they may see too many exits. In fawn, they may see too many obligations to keep others calm. But in collapse, the person may stop seeing options altogether. The field goes flat. Possibility disappears. The imagination contracts. The future loses texture. The person does not necessarily choose the wrong path. They may stop believing any path exists. Collapse can arise after prolonged stress, repeated disappointment, emotional exhaustion, shame, trauma, chronic uncertainty, social defeat, grief, illness, financial pressure, relational instability, or environments where effort repeatedly fails to change outcome. When the body learns that action does not create safety, it may conserve energy by reducing engagement. It stops reaching. It stops protesting. It stops expecting. It stops imagining. From the outside, this may look like laziness, indifference, passivity, pessimism, weakness, or lack of motivation. But internally, it may be protection. The system is saying, I cannot keep spending energy on a world that does not respond. This connects to the idea of learned helplessness. When an organism repeatedly experiences that its actions do not affect the outcome, it can stop trying, even when escape or change later becomes possible. In human terms, this can look like someone who has stopped believing their choices matter. They may remain in a damaging relationship because they cannot imagine leaving. They may stay in a workplace that erodes them because the idea of change feels impossible. They may avoid making decisions because every option feels overwhelming. They may stop seeking truth because every source feels corrupted, every narrative feels manipulated, every system feels rigged, and every conversation feels pointless. Collapse not only removes energy, it can remove agency from perception. A person in collapse may think they are being realistic. This is just how life is. People do not change. There is no point speaking. Nothing ever works. No one listens. The world is too far gone. I cannot trust anything. It does not matter what I do. Some of these statements may be grounded in real experience. They may come from repeated disappointment, betrayal, failure, or systemic obstacles. The point is not to dismiss them. The point is to ask whether they are accurate conclusions or collapse-shaped meanings. Because collapse has a worldview. It turns pain into permanence. It turns exhaustion into philosophy. It turns lack of capacity into lack of possibility. This can happen in relationships. Someone tries repeatedly to communicate a need. Each time, the conversation becomes defensive, dismissive, or unresolved. At first, they fight for clarity. Then they explain more carefully. Then they soften. Then they try again. Eventually, they stop. Not because the need disappeared, but because the system has learned that speaking does not work. The silence that follows may look like peace, but it may actually be collapse. They no longer argue because they no longer believe the relationship can hear them. This is where discernment can become difficult. From the outside, someone may say they seem calmer now, but the calm may not be regulation. It may be resignation. Regulation says, I can hold this. Collapse says there is no holding anything. Regulation widens perception. Collapse flattens it. Regulation allows choice. Collapse removes the felt sense of choice. In workplaces, collapse may appear as disengagement. A person begins with motivation, care, creativity, and willingness. But repeated unclear expectations, criticism without support, lack of recognition, impossible workload, shifting standards, or subtle humiliation gradually erode agency. Eventually, they stop contributing ideas. They stop challenging poor decisions. They stop taking initiative. They do the minimum. Not because they never cared, but because caring became too expensive. The organization may call it low performance, But the deeper pattern may be nervous system shutdown inside an environment that repeatedly taught effort to be unsafe or useless. In public life, collapse can appear as apathy. People are exposed to constant crises, war, corruption, economic pressure, health fear, climate fear, cultural conflict, surveillance, institutional distrust, outrage cycle, scandal, collapse narratives, misinformation, moral panic, and endless emotional activation. At first, they react, then they argue, then they research, then they share, then they become overwhelmed. Eventually, many people shut down. They stop engaging because nothing matters, but because everything matters too much, and the system has no clear path for metabolizing it. This is information overload turning into nervous system collapse. When people are overloaded, discernment does not simply become harder because there is too much information. It becomes harder because the body loses the capacity to care clearly. The person may begin dismissing everything as fake, corrupt, staged, pointless, exaggerated, or unknowable. They may say, you cannot trust anything, which can sound like skepticism, but may actually be collapse. Skepticism asks for better evidence. Collapse gives up on evidence. Skepticism remains curious. Collapse becomes flat. Skepticism protects truth from falsehood. Collapse stops believing the truth can be reached. This distinction matters deeply for the discernment field. Because discernment is not cynicism. It is not the conclusion that everything is manipulation, everyone is lying, and nothing can be known. That is not clarity. That may be a collapse response to overwhelm. The discerning mind does not pretend certainty where there is none, but it also does not abandon the search for proportionate truth. It can say this is unclear without saying nothing matters. It can say this source is unreliable without saying all sources are worthless. This system is distorted without saying no action is possible. Collapse and hides behind intelligence. A person may have sophisticated reasons for disengagement. They may sound philosophically detached, politically disillusioned, spiritually resigned, or intellectually above the noise. Sometimes withdrawal is necessary. Sometimes stepping back is wise. But discernment asks, am I stepping back to recover capacity, or because possibility has disappeared from my nervous system? Am I choosing stillness, or have I lost access to movement? Am I refusing false hope, or have I become unable to feel real possibility? The body matters here. Collapse has bodily signatures: heaviness, low energy, numbness, shallow emotional range, fog, slowness, dissociation, lack of motivation, difficulty deciding, inability to imagine future action, a desire to sleep, withdraw, disappear, or surrender. Again, these may also be linked to health, depression, burnout, grief, or other conditions that deserve care and support. But in the context of discernment, the key point is that collapse changes interpretation. It does not just make us tired. It makes the world look less alive. In collapse, a person may interpret an opportunity as pointless, a boundary as too much effort, a conversation as impossible, a problem as permanent, a change as unrealistic, a relationship as already dead, a public issue as beyond repair, or their own life as too fixed to move. These interpretations may feel rational because the body has no energy to imagine alternatives. But energy is not the same as truth. A body without capacity cannot easily perceive possibility. This is why rest is not separate from discernment. Recovery is not a luxury outside the work of clear perception. If the nervous system is depleted, the mind may not be able to access balanced interpretation. Sleep, food, movement, relational safety, time away from stimulation, quiet, nature, breath, warmth, practical support, and reduced input may all change what reality feels like. This does not mean every problem disappears after rest. It means the range of possible meanings can return when capacity returns. Sometimes the most discerning act is not to think harder, but to restore enough energy to think at all. Collapse also makes people vulnerable to control. A collapsed person may comply because resistance feels impossible. They may accept narratives because questioning takes too much energy. They may stay in systems because imagining exit is overwhelming. They may allow others to decide because decision-making feels unbearable. They may follow whoever offers a simple answer, not because they are convinced, but because simplicity reduces the burden of thought. This is why systems that overwhelm people can shape behavior without needing full agreement. If people are exhausted enough, confused enough, ashamed enough, economically pressured enough, or emotionally saturated enough, they may stop resisting. They may not believe the system is good. They may simply no longer have the capacity to challenge it. This is the politics of collapse, the workplace of collapse, the relationship of collapse, the family system of collapse. Not enthusiastic consent, but depleted compliance. Non-compliant compliance can look like agreement, but it is not the same. The agreement says, I have considered this and I choose it. Collapse says, I cannot keep fighting. This distinction matters because many systems benefit from confusing the two. A person who stops objecting may be treated as satisfied. A group that stops asking questions may be treated as aligned. A population that stops responding may be treated as consenting. But silence after overwhelm is not always consent. Sometimes it is shut down. This is why discernment must ask not only, what do people believe, but what capacity do people have to disagree? If the cost of disagreement is too high, if people are too exhausted to question, if complexity has become unbearable, if every alternative feels impossible, then what appears as belief may actually be collapse. Collapse also affects moral perception. In activation, people may become morally intense. In collapse, they may become morally numb. They may see harm and feel nothing, not because they have no conscience, but because the system has exceeded emotional capacity. This is common in an age of constant exposure to suffering. When everything is urgent, the nervous system may eventually protect itself by feeling less. Compassion fatigue sets in. The person sees tragedy as another item in the feed. Outrage becomes impossible to sustain. Care becomes intermittent. The body withdraws from moral overload. This can lead to shame. People may think, why do I not care anymore? But numbness may be protective. The body may be saying, I cannot process endless crisis without somewhere for the energy to go. Again, the answer is not to shame the numbness. The answer is to restore embodied, proportionate care. Discernment needs feeling, but not emotional flooding. It needs concern, but not constant overwhelm. It needs moral attention, but not to collapse under the weight of everything. This is why scale matters. If every problem is framed as global, urgent, existential, and morally total, the individual nervous system may collapse. But if attention can return to the specific, the local, the actionable, the relational, the proportionate, capacity may return. I cannot fix everything becomes what is mine to notice, say change, refuse, repair, support, or stop feeding. That shift moves the body from helplessness into agency. Agency is one of the antidotes to collapse. Not grandiose agency, not the fantasy of total control, but small, real agency. The ability to make one clear choice. Ask one direct question. Step outside for 10 minutes. Write down what happened. Say no to one thing. Delay one reaction. Seek one grounded conversation. Reduce one source of stimulation. Clarify one boundary. Check one fact. Rest before deciding. These small actions tell the nervous system movement exists. Collapse says there is no movement. Discernment begins by finding one movement that is real. This is also important in personal healing. When someone has been in collapse for a long time, pushing them with aggressive positivity often backfires. Just change your mindset. Just take action. Just stop thinking like that. These phrases can increase shame because they do not understand the state. A collapsed nervous system may not need pressure first. It may need safety, pacing, compassion, and very small steps. It may need to feel that action will not immediately lead to more harm. It may need to experience effectiveness gradually. Language can either deepen collapse or create a path out. You are hopeless, deepens the collapse. Nothing ever changes, deepens collapse. I cannot handle this may be true in the moment, but if repeated as identity, it deepens collapse. More regulatory language might be, I do not have capacity right now, but that does not mean no capacity will ever return. I cannot solve everything, but I can identify the next small step. This feels impossible from this state, so I will not treat the state as the final truth. I am numb, and numbness may be protection, not proof that nothing matters. This is nervous system language again. It does not lie. It does not force optimism. It gives the body a slightly wider frame. It allows the person to hold a collapse without becoming fully identified with it. The same applies relationally. If someone is collapsed, demanding immediate clarity may not work. They may need time, grounding, reduced pressure, or help naming what is happening. A supportive phrase might be, you do not need to solve this right now. Let's find the next small thing. Or, I can see everything feels impossible from here. Let's not make a permanent conclusion from this state. Or, your system seems exhausted. Can we return to this when you have more capacity? These phrases do not remove responsibility, but they respect the state. This matters because many bad decisions are made due to the collapse. People end relationships, give up projects, abandon boundaries, accept poor treatment, make public declarations, surrender agency, or decide their future, while in a state where the nervous system cannot perceive possibility. Sometimes those decisions may still be right, but they deserve to be examined in terms of capacity. A useful principle is, do not make permanent meaning from temporary collapse. If a situation has been consistently harmful, then clarity may remain even after regulation returns. But if the conclusion only appears when depleted and loosens when rested, that tells us something. Discernment asks, does this truth remain true when I have slept, eaten, moved, grounded, spoken to someone trustworthy and returned to my body? Or does it belong mainly to the state of collapse? Collapse can also come after intense activation. The body cannot remain in fight or flight forever. After prolonged outrage, panic, argument, research, conflict, or survival effort, the system may drop. This is why people cycle between intensity and numbness. They become consumed by a topic, relationship, crisis, or belief, then suddenly feel nothing. They think they have found detachment, but it may be depletion. The nervous system has exhausted its mobilization and moved into shutdown. This cycle is common online. Outrage, debate, threat, urgency, moral intensity, then numb scrolling. The system is repeatedly activated and then collapses. Discernment becomes difficult in both states. In activation, the person may overreact. In collapse, they may stop caring. The middle ground, regulated, alert, grounded perception, becomes harder to access. So the practice is to notice the cycle. What activates me? What collapses me? What information patterns drain my capacity? What relationships leave me foggy? What environments make possibility disappear? What forms of engagement help me remain awake without becoming overwhelmed? What rhythms restore me enough to discern? These questions bring collapse into awareness rather than letting it define reality invisibly. A person in collapse may not need a complex theory first. They may need the simplest discernment question, is this a truth or is this a state? There is no point. Truth or state? I cannot do anything. Truth or state? Nothing will change. Truth or state? I do not care. Truth or protection? I have no choice. Truth or collapse? Sometimes the answer may be painful. There really are limits. Some things cannot be changed immediately. Some relationships may not be reparable. Some systems are deeply resistant. Some losses are real. Discernment does not deny this. It does not offer false hope. But it also refuses to let collapse turn limits into totality. A limit is not the same as no possibility. A closed door is not the same as a closed world. This is the work of recovering discernment from collapse, slowly restoring the perception of possibility, not fantasy, not denial, not false positivity, possibility. The possibility of one next step, one cleaner sentence, one boundary, one rest, one refusal, one honest recognition, one smaller frame, one return to the body, one moment where the nervous system learns that the state is not the whole truth. Because collapse tells us the search is over, discernment gently asks whether we have enough capacity to look again. Part 6. The linguistic somatic loop, how language regulates or dysregulates the body. If collapse shows us what happens when the system stops searching for possibilities, then language shows us one of the ways the system is either pushed further into threat or invited back towards capacity. Because language does not only communicate meaning, it not only passes information from one mind to another. Language enters the body. It alters pace, breath, posture, attention, expectation, and emotional state. It can tighten the field or widen it. It can create urgency or restore orientation. It can shame, soothe, provoke, clarify, confuse, pressure, regulate, or collapse. This is one of the central insights that runs beneath the discernment field, and it connects directly to the mirror linguistic hypothesis and nervous system language. If language changes state and state changes perception, then language influences discernment before the argument even begins. The words we hear, the words we use, and the words we repeat inside ourselves become part of the nervous system environment in which interpretation forms. A sentence is never only a sentence. It has content, but it also has tone. It has meaning, but it also has rhythm. It has grammar, but it also has atmosphere. It arrives through pace, timing, implication, facial expression, emotional charge, and relational history. The body receives all of that before the conscious mind has finished analyzing the dictionary meaning of the words. This is why two sentences that technically point towards the same idea can create completely different nervous system responses. Calm down and let's slow this down are not the same to the body. Calm down often carries command. It can imply that the person's state is inconvenient, irrational, excessive, or embarrassing. It may activate shame or resistance. The body may hear, your emotion is the problem. But let's slow this down creates a different field. It includes both people. It suggests pacing, not suppression. It does not shame the emotional state. It invites enough space for clarity to return. The difference may appear small at the level of words, but at the level of the nervous system, it can be enormous. You're overreacting, and something in this feels important. Can we understand it? Are not the same. Your overreacting frames the emotional response as excessive before it has been explored. It often closes the field. The person may feel dismissed, humiliated, defensive, or more activated. But something in this feels important. Can we understand it? Does not automatically validate every conclusion attached to the emotion. It does something more useful. It validates that there is a signal worth translating. It keeps discernment alive. You must decide now and take time to think are not the same. The first creates urgency. It narrows perception. It pushes the nervous system towards pressure, fear of loss, or compliance. The second restores agency. It gives the body permission to return from an emergency. It widens the possibility that the person can choose from capacity rather than activation. What's wrong with you and what is happening in you right now are not the same. The first attack identity. It makes the person the problem. The second invites observation. It turns the moment into inquiry rather than shame. One collapses self-contact. The other may restore it. This is the linguistic somatic loop. Language affects the body affects state affects perception affects meaning affects behavior, and behavior reinforces the field. Once this loop is understood, it becomes impossible to treat language as merely symbolic. Language is regulatory. It is not only what we say, but what our words do to the nervous system. This matters in relationships. A couple may be discussing a conflict, but the real issue may not only be content. It may be the language environment. One person says, "You always do this." The other hears the accusation. Their body prepares a defense. They respond, "That's not fair." Now the first person hears invalidation. Their body prepares fight. The conversation escalates. But the escalation did not begin only from the original issue. It began in the language field. Compare that with, "This pattern has happened a few times, and I'm starting to feel anxious about it. Can we look at it together?" That sentence still names a concern. It does not avoid the issue, but it creates a different field. It brings in a pattern without global accusation. It names feeling without turning feeling into a verdict. It invites collaboration rather than immediately assigning blame. This is not about making every sentence soft. Sometimes firmness is necessary. Sometimes clarity must be direct. Sometimes no is the most regulated sentence available. Sometimes that is not acceptable is cleaner than a long explanation. Nervous system language is not about politeness as performance. It is about alignment between truth, state, and impact. A boundary can be firm without being dysregulating. A confrontation can be direct without being humiliating. A correction can be honest without becoming a character attack. The question is, does this language open the possibility of clearer perception? Or does it push the field deeper into survival? Language can activate threat. It can do this through accusation, contempt, mockery, urgency, shame, exaggeration, globalizing, and moral pressure. Phrases like "you never, you always, everyone knows," are "only an idiot would," "you're impossible," "you're too sensitive," "what's wrong with you?" And if you cared, you would do not only communicate a point, they position the listener inside a threat field. The body may move into flight, freeze, or fawn before the actual issue is examined. Language can also create collapse. This is more subtle. Collapse language often turns a present difficulty into a permanent condition. Nothing will ever change. There's no point. I can't do anything. It's all hopeless. I'm just broken. People are always like this. The world is finished. These statements may reflect a real state and they deserve compassion, but repeated as truth, they can deepen the shutdown. The body hears permanence. The nervous system stops searching, meaning narrows around defeat. Regulatory language does not lie against that state. It does not say, everything is fine, when everything is not fine. It does not force positivity. It introduces a little more space. This feels impossible from here, but I may not be seeing everything from this state. I do not have capacity right now, but that does not mean no capacity will return. I cannot solve the whole thing, but I can find the next small step. I feel numb, and numbness may be protection. I do not need to make a permanent conclusion from temporary collapse. Notice the difference. Regulatory language does not deny pain. It prevents pain from becoming a total reality. This is also why inner language matters so much. Many people focus on how others speak to them, but the nervous system is also shaped by the voice inside. That inner voice may be inherited from family, school, culture, religion, trauma, authority, social media, or previous relationships. It may carry shame scripts, fear scripts, perfectionist scripts, scarcity scripts, abandonment scripts, or control scripts. You are stupid for feeling this. You should be over this. You always ruin everything. No one will stay. You have to fix this now. You cannot trust anyone. If you say no, you are selfish. If you rest, you are lazy. If you are wrong, you are worthless. These inner phrases are not neutral. They create a state. They tighten the body, narrow perception, and push the mind into defense, collapse, compliance, or over-control. The person may then believe they are reacting to the external situation, when actually they are reacting to the external situation plus an internal linguistic field that has already made the body unsafe. A more discerning inner language might sound like, something in me is activated. This feeling matters, but it may not be the whole story. I can slow down before I decide. I am allowed to ask what is mine and what is not mine. I can set a boundary without turning myself into a bad person. I can be wrong and remain intact. I can check the facts when I have capacity. I do not need to obey urgency just because urgency is present. This is not self-help decoration. It is state intervention. It gives the nervous system a more precise grammar through which to process reality. This is where nervous system language becomes practical. It is not simply about using gentler words. It is about designing language that helps the body remain oriented enough for discernment. Language that names the state without becoming the state. Language that allows emotion without letting emotion dominate the whole field. Language that separates signal from story. Language that creates enough safety for truth to be approached without collapse. A simple structure might be, name the state, preserve agency, widen the frame. Name the state, I am activated. I feel shame rising. My body is reading this as a threat. I can feel myself wanting to shut down. Preserve agency, I do not need to decide immediately. I can pause. I can ask for context. I can return to this when I have capacity. Widen the frame, this may be present danger, or it may be memory. There may be more than one explanation. This is serious, but I need proportion. I can hold the feeling and still examine the evidence. This kind of language changes the nervous system environment from within. Relationally, it can sound like, I want to understand this, but I can feel myself becoming defensive, so I need to slow down. I hear that this hurt you. I want to know exactly what happened, not dismiss it. I am not ready to answer cleanly yet. I need time so I do not respond from collapse. I am feeling pressure to agree quickly and I need space before deciding. I can discuss the issue, but not through shame. I want to stay with the behavior rather than turning this into a character trial. These sentences are powerful because they interrupt automatic survival patterns. They do not pretend the body is calm. They bring the state into awareness. They create a bridge between activation and response. Language can also dysregulate through ambiguity. A vague accusation creates a threat because the mind cannot locate the danger. People have noticed things about you. Your energy has been off. You need to reflect on yourself. Something about you makes people uncomfortable. These phrases may sound subtle, but they can create deep nervous system activation because they offer no clear object for reality testing. The person feels exposed but cannot examine the specifics. This is why specificity is regulatory. It gives the body something to work with. Compare. Your energy has been off lately with, in yesterday's meeting, when you interrupted twice, I noticed the conversation became tense. Can we talk about how to handle disagreement? The second may still be uncomfortable, but it is clearer. It names behavior, context, and a path. The first leaves the person swimming in vague shame. This is an important principle. Clarity can be regulated even when it is difficult. Many people confuse regulation with comfort, but sometimes comfort is avoidance, and clarity is the real regulation. A hard truth spoken cleanly may be more regulating than a vague kindness that hides resentment. A direct boundary may be more regulating than a soft ambiguity that keeps everyone guessing. A specific criticism may be more regulating than a general atmosphere of disapproval. Language regulates when it makes reality more navigable. Language dysregulates when it makes reality more foggy, threatening, humiliating, or impossible to test. This applies to public language as well. Public narratives often work by creating large-scale nervous system states. Headlines do not merely inform, they activate. Political slogans do not merely summarize, they organize emotion. Advertising does not merely describe, it creates lack, desire, aspiration, fear of missing out, or identity hunger. Ideological language does not merely explain, it creates belonging and enemies. Crisis language does not merely warn, it can mobilize or overwhelm. A headline that says new evidence raises questions about policy failures creates one state. A headline that says, "Shocking betrayal proves they never cared about you," creates another. The information might overlap, but the nervous system impact is different. One invites attention. The other recruits are outraged. One asks for analysis. The other pushes identity and emotion. This is why discernment in public life requires linguistic somatic awareness. We need to ask, what is this language asking my body to do? Is it asking me to panic, hate, desire, obey, shame, belong, attack, give up, or share immediately? Is it giving me enough information to think or only enough emotion to react? Is it making uncertainty tolerable or using uncertainty to rush me into a conclusion? Repeated phrases are especially powerful. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity can feel like truth. A phrase repeated enough times can become a nervous system pathway. It begins to activate a whole emotional field instantly. A label appears and the body already knows what to feel. A slogan appears and the group identity activates. A phrase from childhood appears and shame returns. Repetition lowers resistance because the nervous system recognizes the pattern before the mind examines it. This is why slogans can be useful and dangerous. They can condense truth into memorable form, but they can also replace thought. Once a slogan becomes identity, nuance becomes harder. The body may feel loyalty to the phrase even when the situation requires complexity. Discernment asks, does this phrase open inquiry or close it? Does it help me see or tell me what to feel before I look? The same applies to labels. Labels can clarify. Words like manipulation, trauma, abuse, co-gaslighting, projection, nervous system collapse, and emotional regulation can be extremely useful when applied precisely. They give language to patterns that would otherwise remain vague. But labels can also dysregulate when they arrive too early or too broadly. Calling someone manipulative before examining behavior may create a threat. Calling yourself broken may deepen collapse. Calling a disagreement unsafe may narrow the field. Calling a group evil may remove the need to understand incentives, history, or complexity. Labels should serve discernment, not replace it. This is why language must remain accountable to reality. A strong word should be matched by clear evidence, pattern, and proportion. If the word is too large for the situation, the nervous system may respond to the word rather than the reality. This happens often online. A word with moral or emotional force enters the field, and people respond to the force of the label before examining what actually happened. The linguistic somatic loop can therefore become a tool of manipulation. If someone knows which words activate shame, guilt, fear, desire, belonging, or collapse, they can steer perception without needing to argue honestly. A good person would understand. Only cowards question this. Everyone is watching. You are not safe unless you act now. You are special because you see this. They are all against you. If you leave, you prove you never cared. These phrases do not merely express a view. They pressure the body into a state where some choices become emotionally expensive. Discernment responds by slowing the language field. It asks for a translation. What specifically is being asked of me? What behavior is being named? What evidence supports this? What emotion is this phrase creating? Is this language helping me see clearly or pushing me into compliance, panic, shame, or certainty? This is where the series' earlier themes come together. Emotional intelligence helps us notice what the language activates. Critical thinking helps us examine the claim. Nervous system awareness helps us read the state. MLH and NSL help us understand that language is part of the field, not just commentary on the field. This is also why repair requires language. When harm happens, the nervous system needs more than abstract intention. It often needs clear words that restore orientation. I did say that. I understand how it affected you. That was not fair. I am sorry. Here is what I will do differently. You are not wrong for bringing this up. These phrases can regulate because they reduce ambiguity and restore contact with reality. A poor apology often dysregulates because it avoids this clarity. I'm sorry you feel that way. Mistakes were made. I guess I'm just a terrible person then. I already said sorry. What more do you want? These phrases may intensify threat, shame, or confusion because they shift focus, avoid ownership, or pressure the injured person to comfort the one apologizing. Again, language creates state. Clean repair language is specific, accountable, and grounded. It does not overperform shame. It does not collapse into self-attack. It does not hide behind vagueness. It makes reality safer to share. This is vital because unresolved relational language can live in the body. Words spoken in childhood, conflict, humiliation, rejection, or manipulation can become inner scripts. You're too much. Stop crying. You're selfish. You always make things difficult. No one will believe you. You should be grateful. These phrases can continue shaping state years later. The body hears echoes. Present language can trigger the old language. Someone says, "Can we talk?" and the body hears every past conversation where talking meant punishment. Healing then may require new language repeated enough times to become believable to the body. Not fake affirmation, but accurate, regulating language. My feelings are signals, not crimes. I can take time. I can be accountable without being annihilated. A boundary is not cruelty. A mistake does not erase my worth. I can listen to fear without handing it the whole story. I can be affected and still choose. This is how language becomes a bridge from survival state to discernment. The practice is not to control every word obsessively. That would create another kind of anxiety. The practice is to become aware of the state our language carries. Before speaking, we might ask, am I about to regulate or escalate? Am I about to clarify or shame? Am I about to name behavior or attack identity? Am I about to invite thought or force urgency? Am I about to speak from truth or from the survival state that wants relief? When listening, we can ask, what is this language doing to my body? What state is it asking me to enter? What role is it giving me? Is it making me more capable of discernment or less? With ourselves, we can ask, is my inner language helping me return to capacity, or keeping me trapped in threat, shame, collapse, or urgency? This is the linguistic somatic loop. Language shapes the body shapes perception, perception shapes belief, belief shapes behavior, behavior shapes the field, and the field shapes the next language. So if we want discernment to survive activation, we must become more conscious of language at the level of the state. Not just, is this sentence true, but what does this sentence do? Does it narrow or widen? Does it shame or clarify? Does it rush or orient? Does it collapse or restore agency? Does it create fog or make reality more navigable? Does it help the nervous system return to enough safety for truth to be approached? If the state narrows perception, then language is one of the ways the state is shaped. And if language can narrow the field, language can also help widen it again. This is why words matter. Not because they are magic in some simplistic sense, but because the body is listening. Part 7 Field Scenario, Applied State Analysis. This is where we bring the nervous system layer into a real-world scenario, because it is one thing to say that state shapes perception, and another thing to watch it happen in motion. Discernment often collapses not because someone lacks intelligence, or because they do not care about truth, but because information arrives in a body that is already under pressure. The stimulus may be external, but the interpretation is shaped by the state that receives it. Imagine a person at the end of a difficult day. They have not slept well. They have financial worries in the background. They have been dealing with work pressure, unresolved messages, family tension, and a general feeling that life is moving faster than they can process. Their body is not in obvious crisis, but it is not settled either. It is already braced. The breath is shallow. The attention is scattered. The body is scanning for the next problem before the current one has been metabolized. Then, late at night, they pick up their phone. A headline appears. It is emotionally loaded. It uses urgency, moral pressure, and fear. It suggests that something dangerous, corrupt, unjust, or socially significant has happened. The wording is sharp. The image is dramatic. The comments beneath it are already polarized. People are angry. People are afraid. People are accusing others of ignorance, complicity, cruelty, weakness, or betrayal. The person does not encounter the story as neutral information. They encounter it as a state event. The stimulus is the headline. But the body state existed before the headline arrived. That distinction matters. The nervous system was already carrying stress, fatigue, worry, and social tension. So when the headline enters the field, it does not land on an empty surface. It lands on activation. The body performs a rapid neuroceptive scan. Is this dangerous? Is this relevant to me? Is this another sign that things are getting worse? Am I supposed to act? Am I supposed to share this? Am I supposed to be outraged? Am I bad if I do not respond? Before the person has read the full article, the emotional field has already begun forming. There may be fear, something is happening, and I need to know. There may be anger, these people are lying again. There may be disgust, how could anyone defend this? There may be shame, if I do not speak, am I part of the problem? There may be belonging, my people are reacting strongly, so this must matter. There may be urgency, I need to post this now before others miss it. Now the survival response begins to shape interpretation. If fight is active, the story becomes a target. The person searches for who is responsible, who is lying, who needs exposing, and who must be challenged. The headline becomes evidence of an enemy. The comments become fuel. The person may share the story with sharp language, not only to inform, but to discharge anger. If flight is active, the person may rush through the material, open multiple tabs, jump between videos, search for instant certainty, and try to escape the discomfort of not knowing. They may move quickly, but not necessarily clearly. Information becomes movement, and movement becomes relief. If freeze is active, they may become overwhelmed and foggy. They read the headline, scroll through arguments, feel the weight of everything, and then shut down. They do not know what to believe, so the whole field feels impossible. They may think, you cannot trust anything, and mistake that collapse for critical thinking. If Fawn is active, it may look to the group for the correct response. What are people like me saying? What should I feel? What will happen if I do not agree? They may share the story not because they fully understand it, but because the group atmosphere makes silence feel unsafe. The interpretation is now forming. The person begins connecting the story to previous beliefs, memories, frustrations, and fears. This proves what I thought. This is exactly what they do. People are asleep, and no one cares. The world is becoming more dangerous. If you question this, you are part of the problem. The headline has become more than a headline. It has become a portal into a larger narrative. Then comes the behavioral react. They share the story. They comment. They argue. They accuse someone who questions the framing. They dismiss calls for context as weakness or complicity, or they withdraw into numbness and say nothing because the whole thing feels too much. Either way, the response is not only about the information. It is about the information moving through a nervous system that was already under strain. Social reinforcement then strengthens the loop. If they share the story and receive approval, the body experiences relief and belonging. If someone challenges them, fight or shame may intensify. If the group rewards outrage, outrage becomes more attractive. If the group punishes hesitation, certainty becomes safer. The person may now believe they are defending truth, but they may also be defending the state that formed around the first interpretation. So how do we reconstruct this through discernment? The first question is not, was the story true or false? That matters, but it is not the first layer. The first question is, what state was I in before the information arrived? Was I tired, angry, ashamed, lonely, stressed, overstimulated, frightened, or already looking for confirmation of something? What did my body bring into the encounter before the headline did anything? The second question is, what did the language do to my nervous system? Did it create urgency? Did it make me feel guilty for pausing? Did it make me afraid? Did it give me a target? Did it offer belonging? Did it make me feel morally superior? Did it make complexity feel dangerous? The third question is, what did I seek after activation, truth, relief, belonging, discharge, or certainty? This is a hard question because we often want to believe we are only seeking truth. But sometimes we are seeking the relief of being right. Sometimes we are seeking the release of anger. Sometimes we are seeking the safety of the group. Sometimes we are seeking the comfort of a simple enemy. Sometimes we are seeking an explanation for a feeling that was already in the body before the information arrived. The fourth question is, what would I have seen if I were regulated? Would I have checked the source? Would I have read beyond the headline? Would I have waited? Would I have noticed uncertainty? Would I have asked what was confirmed and what was inferred? Would I have been able to hold seriousness without panic, concern without outrage, skepticism without collapse? This is applied state analysis. It does not say the story is unimportant. It says the state receiving the story matters. Now, take a relational example. Someone receives a short message from a friend or partner. Can we talk later? That is the stimulus. But again, the body state matters. If the person is already stressed, tired, insecure, or carrying unresolved abandonment fear, the message may not land as neutral. The nervous system scans, danger, the stomach tightens, the chest contracts, the mind begins forming explanations. They are angry. They are leaving. I have done something wrong. This is the beginning of rejection. The message itself is ambiguous, but the body fills the ambiguity with threat. This is not stupidity. It is a prediction. The nervous system is using past patterns to interpret present cues. Maybe can we talk later once preceded criticism, abandonment, punishment, or emotional withdrawal. So the body does not wait for context. It prepares. A reactive response might be, what have I done now? Or, if you're ending this, just say it. Or, you always do this. Or the person may withdraw, fawn, over-explain, apologize, or sit in panic for hours. The behavior follows the state. A discerning reconstruction would slow the sequence. What state was I in before the message arrived? Already anxious. What did the message do to my body? Tighten my chest, created fear. What story formed? They are angry, and I am being rejected. What do I actually know? Only that they asked to talk later. What else could it mean? It could be practical tiredness, wanting proper time, something unrelated, or yes, possibly a difficult conversation. What response would be proportionate? Ask for context. Without accusing. A state-aware reply might be, yes, we can talk later. Is everything okay, or is there anything I need to be aware of before then? That sentence does not deny the body's fear. It seeks information without forcing the fear into reality. It creates a bridge between activation and discernment. This is the heart of applied state analysis. The stimulus is not the whole story. The body before the stimulus matters. The language of the stimulus matters. The survival response matters. The story is formed from the state matters. The behavior that follows matters. And then the social or relational reinforcement matters. When we see the full sequence, we gain choice, stimulus, pre-existing body state, neuroceptive scan, emotional activation, survival response, interpretation, narrative formation, behavioral reaction, reinforcement. Then discernment asks us to move back through the chain. Where did the state's narrow perception come from? Where did language activate urgency? Where did history enter the present? Where did the group reward reaction? Where did the body seek relief rather than truth? What would become visible if capacity returned? This practice is not about becoming slow for the sake of being slow. It is about becoming accurate enough not to let activation write the entire story. In real life, the state will not always wait politely while we analyze it. We will still react. We will still post too quickly, reply too sharply, withdraw too fast, agree too easily, or collapse too quietly. The work is not about perfection, it is recovery. How quickly can we notice the sequence after it begins? How quickly can we say, I think I interpreted that from activation? How quickly can we return to the evidence, the body, the pattern, and the present moment? That is discernment in practice. Not thought above the body, not body above thought, but the two brought into a relationship, so reality has a better chance of being seen clearly. Part 8, the regulation discernment practice. Returning to capacity before interpretation. If the state narrows perception, then discernment begins by returning to enough capacity before the story hardens. This does not mean we must become perfectly calm before we respond. That is unrealistic. It means we create enough space for the nervous system to stop treating the moment as an emergency. We can call this practice the state check before the story. The first step is to pause before interpretation. Even a few seconds can matter. A breath, a delay before replying, a decision not to share the headline immediately. A moment where you say, something in me has reacted and I need to notice that before I decide what this means. The second step is to locate the body state. Is the chest tight? Is the stomach dropping? Is the jaw clenched? Is the body hot, numb, restless, frozen, or heavy? The body often reveals the state before the mind admits it. The third step is to name the survival response. Is fight active, searching for an enemy? Is flight active, searching for an exit? Is freeze active, making speech or choice feel impossible? Is fawn active, trying to restore approval? Naming the state does not shame it. It makes it visible. The fourth step is to separate present cues from past templates. Ask, what is actually happening now and what does this resemble? Is this present danger, old memory, social threat, shame, exhaustion, or a mixture? The fifth step is to slow down language. Instead of this is terrible, try, this feels serious and I need more context. Instead of they are abandoning me, try, my body is reading this as abandonment. I need to check what is actually happening. The sixth step is to widen the frame. What else could be true? What evidence exists? What evidence is missing? What would I see if I were rested, grounded, and less activated? The seventh step is to delay the conclusion until capacity returns. Some decisions need immediate action, but many reactions only feel urgent because the nervous system is under threat. Finally, respond from regulation, not collapse or activation. Do not ask the mind to discern while the body is still in emergency. Return to capacity first. Then let the story form more slowly. Part 9 Integration Discernment begins in the body. So as we come towards the close of this episode, we return to the central idea that has been moving beneath every part. Discernment is not only intellectual, it is embodied. It depends on nervous system state, bodily capacity, emotional regulation, and the conditions through which thought becomes possible. We often imagine discernment as something that happens in the mind alone. We picture someone weighing evidence, analyzing claims, evaluating sources, questioning assumptions, and reaching a balanced conclusion. And yes, those skills matter. But this episode has asked us to look beneath them, because before the mind evaluates evidence, the body may already have decided whether the field feels safe, dangerous, humiliating, urgent, overwhelming, familiar, or impossible. When the body is in threat, the mind may organize reality around survival. It may search for enemies, exits, proof, certainty, blame, approval, or relief. When the body is in fight or in disagreement may look like an attack. When the body is in flight, discomfort may look like danger. When the body is in freeze, choice may disappear. When the body is in fawn, someone else's emotional state may become more important than the truth. When the body is in collapse, possibility itself may vanish from perception. That is why state matters. A person in collapse may not be seeing the full field. They may be seeing through exhaustion. A person in panic may not be seeing the full field. They may be seeing through the threat. A person in shame may not see the full field. They may be seeing through exposure. A person in chronic stress may not be seeing the full field. They may be seeing through depletion. This does not make their experience meaningless. It means their experience requires translation. The body is not the enemy of discernment. The body is part of discernment. It gives signals. It detects the atmosphere. It senses danger. It remembers patterns. It reads tone, silence, rhythm, pressure, pace, and relational history before conscious thought has caught up. Sometimes the body sees what the mind has not yet admitted. Sometimes the body reacts to the past entering the present. Sometimes it warns. Sometimes it remembers. Sometimes it protects. Sometimes it overpredicts. Sometimes it collapses because it has carried too much for too long. So the task is not to obey every bodily signal blindly, and not to dismiss bodily signals as irrational. The task is to develop a relationship with the nervous system, to ask, what is my body reading here? What state am I in? What survival response has become active? What story is this state beginning to create? What part of this belongs to the present, and what part belongs to an older pattern? What would I perceive if I had more capacity? That is embodied discernment. It is not thought above the body, and it is not body above thought. It is the two brought into a relationship. This is why language matters so much. Language can push the body deeper into threat, shame, urgency, or collapse. But language can also restore orientation. It can slow the field. It can widen the meaning. It can help the nervous system return to enough safety for truth to be approached. You are overreacting creates one field. Something in this feels important. Can we understand it? Creates another. There is no point creates one field. This feels impossible from this state. I need capacity before I decide creates another. They are abandoning me creates one field. My body is reading this as abandonment. I need to check what is actually happening creates another. Words do not merely describe a state. They participate in the state. If state shapes perception, then language shapes discernment. This is where the mirror linguistic hypothesis and nervous system language become practical rather than abstract. If language carries state and state shapes interpretation, then the way we speak to ourselves, to each other, and through public narratives changes the conditions under which reality is perceived. A phrase can narrow the field. A question can widen it. A label can collapse complexity. A clean sentence can restore agency. A repeated slogan can train a reaction. A grounded reflection can return us to capacity. The clearer mind is often downstream from the safer body. That does not mean we need perfect safety before we can think. Life does not always give us perfect conditions. It means the body needs enough safety, enough capacity, enough orientation, enough breath, enough space, and enough agency to allow more than one meaning to exist. Discernment requires a little opening where the first reaction does not become the final story. So when we practice discernment, we are not only practicing logic. We are practicing state awareness. We are practicing pause. We are practicing body literacy. We are practicing emotional translation. We are practicing the ability to notice when survival is speaking. We are practicing the ability to return from an emergency before we build a worldview around it. And this may be one of the most compassionate insights in the series so far. Many people are not failing to see clearly because they are incapable of thought. They are struggling to see clearly because their nervous system has been overloaded, threatened, shamed, exhausted, manipulated, or collapsed. The answer is not to shame them into better thinking. The answer is to understand what conditions make better thinking possible. That understanding does not remove responsibility. It deepens it. Because once we know that state shapes perception, we become responsible for noticing our state before we let it speak as truth. We become responsible for not making permanent conclusions from temporary collapse. We become responsible for not sharing from panic, accusing from shame, fawning from agreement, attacking from fight, escaping from flight, or surrendering from freeze without reflection. We become responsible for creating enough capacity, where possible, to respond rather than only react. Episode 5 closes the first arc of the discernment field, the distortion layer. Across these first 5 episodes, we have explored how interpretation becomes compromised through emotional reaction, emotional misreading, manipulation, identity capture, and now nervous system state. This episode brings the foundation into the body. It reminds us that the search for clarity is not only mental, it is somatic, relational, linguistic, and environmental. Discernment begins when we ask not only what is true, but also, what state am I in as I search for truth? Because the nervous system does not simply respond to reality. It participates in the reality we believe we are responding to. In the next episode, we begin a new arc, Arc 2, the strategic human. Episode 6 is game theory in everyday life. If episode 5 closes the distortion layer by showing how state narrows perception, episode 6 opens the strategic layer by asking, once we can see more clearly, how do we understand the incentives shaping behavior around us? Because human behavior does not happen in isolation. People respond to rewards, punishments, risks, status, belonging, scarcity, competition, cooperation, reputation, leverage, and hidden motives. Sometimes people act from emotion, sometimes from strategy, sometimes from unconscious conditioning, sometimes from incentives they may not even recognize. Game theory gives us one lens for examining this, not coldly or mechanically, but as a way of asking, what is being rewarded here? What does each person stand to gain or lose? What behavior does the system encourage? Where is cooperation possible? Where is competition being created? Where are people signaling? Where are they protecting their position? Where are they making choices that only make sense once we understand the game being played? This is the natural next step for the discernment field. First, we learned how perception becomes distorted. Now we begin learning how behavior becomes strategic. Because once the field becomes clearer, we can start to read not only what people say, but the incentives, pressures, and hidden structures shaping what they do. So we close this episode. Consider one question. Where in your life have you mistaken a nervous system state for the final truth? And perhaps a second, what would become visible if your body had enough safety to let perception widen? Not to judge yourself, not to dismiss your body, but to listen more carefully, to translate the signal before turning it into a story, to give yourself enough space that the present can be seen as the present, not only through the echo of survival. May you remember that clarity is not always forced through more thinking. Sometimes clarity begins with breath, body, pacing, rest, language, and the quiet return of capacity. May you honor the signals of your nervous system without letting them become the whole of reality. May you find the space between activation and conclusion. And may your discernment become rooted not only in the mind that analyses, but in the body that learns it is safe enough to see. Until next time, thank you for joining me today. You've been listening to the Discernment Field, Episode 5, The Nervous System and the Collapse of Discernment, When State Narrows Perception. I'm James Miller.